Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Today's episode is the second in a short series focusing on vocabulary to help you understand the US presidential election. If you haven't already, please listen to episode 6, titled Vocabulary for the US presidential election. Thinking in a foreign language is a vital step on the road to fluency, and this podcast aims to help you achieve this by discussing various topics, ranging from current events to science, philosophy, economics, and much more. All transcripts of the podcasts are now available on the Thinking in English blog. The vocabulary lists, comprehension questions, and articles are there for you to read. The link is in the description, so please check it out. You might have already noticed that the blog has a new domain, thinkinginenglish.blog. thinkinginenglish.blog. And we are now finally available on Apple Podcasts, so be sure to leave us a rating and a review. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Nuance. Nuance. This is a slight difference in appearance, meaning, sound, etc. For example, linguists explore the nuances of language. Candidate. Candidate. A person who is competing to get a job or an elected position. For example, there are 3 candidates standing in the election. Weakness. Weakness. A particular part or quality of someone or something that is not good or effective. For example, his main weakness as a worker is his inability to follow orders. Veteran. Veteran. This adjective means having been involved in a particular activity for a long time. So, for example, she is a veteran campaigner for human rights. Office. Office. A position of authority and responsibility in a government or other organization. For example, the new president takes office on January 20th. To nominate. To nominate. To officially suggest someone for an election, job, position, or honor. For example, he has been nominated by the Green Party as their candidate in the next election. To allocate. To allocate. This is to decide officially that something should be given to a particular person. For example, the primary election allocated all of the delegates to Donald Trump. Ballot. Ballot. This is a system of secret voting. Representatives were elected by ballot. Obligated. Obligated. This adjective means to be morally or legally forced to do something. So, for example, I felt obligated to speak up and defend my friend's reputation. And finally, battleground. Battleground. A place where an argument or competition is happening. So, Pennsylvania and Ohio are key battlegrounds in this year's election. Today, we will continue our series of episodes focusing on vocabulary surrounding the US presidential election. There is now just over 2 weeks to go before we reach the climax of the battle between Trump and Biden. So this vocabulary might be incredibly useful in helping you understand some of the important details and specific nuances found in American politics. If you didn't have the chance to listen to episode 6 of Thinking in English, I'd really encourage you to go back and have a listen. We looked at some of the most essential terms, including president and vice president, liberal and conservative, and Senate and House of Representatives. Today, we will look at even more vocabulary that is closely related to the electoral process in the USA. Ticket. First up today is ticket. You have probably heard of some of the other meanings of ticket, such as a train ticket. But did you know that ticket has an important meaning in US politics, and also in politics around the world? Basically, a ticket is the list of candidates who are representing a particular political party or group in an election. Often we put the name of the political party before the word ticket. So in the USA, you might hear talk about the Republican ticket or the Democratic ticket. Therefore, candidates for the presidency and vice presidency are said to run on the same ticket. There are also a few other key terms that include ticket. Balancing the ticket. Balancing the ticket is when the presidential candidate chooses a vice presidential candidate whose qualities balance out their weaknesses. The USA is a massive country with an incredibly diverse population and a huge political system. To cover as many different options as possible, political parties will try to balance their candidates. An old presidential candidate might choose a young vice president. A senator who spent their entire career in Washington, D.C., might choose a state governor who has never worked there. A candidate from California or the northeast of the USA might choose a southern running mate. The idea is to make the ticket as diverse or balanced as possible, to attract as many voters as possible. So, for example, in 2008, Barack Obama, seen as a young and relatively inexperienced, selected veteran Senator Joe Biden as his running mate. And in the future, I guess that balancing the ticket will also begin to involve gender and race. An excellent example of this is the current 2020 Democratic ticket for the election. Joe Biden, a white male, an experienced old senator from Delaware in the northeast of the USA, chose Kamala Harris, a younger female from California with no experience as a politician in Washington, and, importantly, also a candidate with mixed African American and Indian heritage. Split ticket voting. Split ticket voting is a practice whereby individual voters spread their votes across multiple parties during an election. This type of voting occurs in elections in which more than one office is up for election. In the USA, for example, every voter has the opportunity to vote for president, vice president, and the candidate for House of Representatives, and also a senator every 6 years, as well as more elections locally. So if I decided to vote for a Democratic president and vice president, but chose to vote for the Republican senator or congressman or congresswoman, I would be splitting my ticket. I'm voting for more than one political party at the same election. This used to be quite common in the USA, especially when the political parties were closer together in opinions, but has become less common in recent years. The next few vocabulary terms we will cover are connected to how a political party decides their candidates for an election. Although this process finished a few months ago, they are still talked about regularly in more current news. Primary. Let's start with the primaries. They are state-level elections held to nominate a party's candidate for office. They happen at different times in different states. In some states, voters are restricted to choosing a candidate only from the party for which they have registered to support. However, 29 states allow open primaries in which any voter can vote. In this case, strategic voting might take place, with, for example, a Republican voting for a weaker Democratic candidate to help their own chance in the presidential election. Primaries first emerged in the early 20th century because it was decided that leaving the nomination process purely to party bosses was undemocratic. Caucus. Primaries are not the only method of choosing a party's presidential candidate. Around 12 states use caucuses instead, but the number is different according to the party. A caucus is essentially a meeting of party members and activists at which they choose which candidate to back for the party nomination. The procedures vary state by state and party by party, but participants in presidential caucuses meet in their local communities to choose which candidate they want to support. The caucuses allocate delegates based on that level of support, and the results are then counted statewide, and the candidate with the most delegates is said to win. National Convention. The National Convention is the party assembly held every 4 years, at which state delegates from across the country gather to nominate the party's candidates for president and vice president. The nominees are typically chosen by party voters in primary elections and caucuses well ahead of these conventions. But the formal convention processes remain in place in case the decision over the party's candidate is very close or controversial. In 1924, a bitterly divided Democratic Party took 103 ballots to decide on their presidential candidate. The National Convention is also a place where the candidates can make speeches, other politicians can support their party, and even celebrities can appear. Delegates. Delegates are the party members whose votes at the National Convention officially determine the two parties' presidential candidates. Most of the delegates at the convention are obligated to vote for the candidate chosen in primary elections or caucuses in their home state. They are referred to as pledged or elected delegates. Some delegates, however, are unpledged and are able to vote for any candidate at the convention. In the Democratic Party, these unpledged delegates are called superdelegates, and they include senior members of the party and also members elected to the Democratic National Committee, the party's governing body. Swing states. Swing states are states in which the voters are relatively evenly split between Republicans and Democrats. This means that in some elections they support the Republicans and sometimes they support Democrats. Consequently, political parties often target and campaign in these states, and they can be really important to the election result. In recent elections, the most important swing states were Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Those have a high number of electoral votes, making them prime battlegrounds during the election? Electoral college. The final term for today is electoral college. What is an electoral college? Well, most people think that when they vote in the US election, they are directly voting for the president. A vote for Donald Trump is a vote for Donald Trump, or a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Joe Biden. But that is not true. In fact, in 2016, Hillary Clinton received more votes than Donald Trump, but still lost the election. So, how could this happen? It is because the USA does not have direct elections for the president, but instead uses the Electoral College. This is the collective term for the 538 electors who officially elect the president and the vice president of the United States. Each state is given a number of electors, and this number of electors for each state is equal to the combined total of its senators and representatives in Congress. The votes for president are counted in each state, and the person with the most votes receives the Electoral College votes. So, for example, if Donald Trump wins 51% of the vote in Texas, he will receive 100% of Texas's Electoral College votes. And presidential candidates require a majority of 270 college votes to win the presidency. Two states, Nebraska and Maine, now divide their electors in proportion to the popular vote given to each candidate. But in the other 48, it's a simple majority. So if you win 51% of the vote, you receive 100% of that state's votes. This is how Donald Trump was able to win the 2016 election while he actually had a lower amount of votes. So here is today's final thought. In this episode, we have looked at some very important vocabulary regarding the US elections. Now, when you hear and read about tickets, primaries, or the Electoral College, you will understand a little better, hopefully. But how about in your country? How are candidates for elections decided? Do you have primaries? Or are they decided in a different way? Moreover, how do you vote for your president or leader? Are there direct elections? Or, like America, do you have an electoral college? Or maybe, like the UK, you don't actually get to vote for your leader. People have debated for hundreds of years about what is the best system for choosing their leaders. And almost every country in the world has a slightly different system. So which one do you think is the best? What do you think? So here are today's comprehension questions. As always, the questions and answers are in the description of the podcast and also available on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Joe Biden was a senator in which state? How many electoral college votes does a presidential candidate need to win? True or false? If I vote for a Republican president and a Republican senator, I am split ticket voting. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. Also check out our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for the full articles, vocabulary lists, and potentially over the next few weeks there might be some extra bonus content available on the blog. If you have any ideas for topics, future podcast guests, or other learning formats, please let us know. And please, by all means, leave us a rating. Really, really appreciate it. We're now available on Apple, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. So maybe some of you would rather listen on there, and definitely leave us a review if you can. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.